2024 was not a great year to be a Russian soldier, but just how bad was it? And what did Russia gain out of the equation? Plus, is the Russian economy also gearing up for another terrible 2025? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. All right, so think of this as kind of a year in review, right? There's a couple of stats and changes in the battlefield that I want to look back on and at least recognize. So one is that the Russian military is believed to have suffered almost 500,000 casualties just in 2024 alone. As according to General Syrskyi, the commander-in-chief of Ukrainian armed forces. But we know that the U.S. estimates of Russian losses are actually pretty commensurate with this. And while I point out that, again, this 400,000 number likely includes both killed and wounded, and many of those wounded likely returned to the battlefield. Based on sort of other stats in this war, you're probably looking at around, I'd say 50 to 100,000 KIA Russians in a year. That's pretty astounding, honestly. And what's worse is that this appears to be escalating. Ukraine said that Moscow's troops took massive casualties in November, December, again, pushing Russia's losses through the war to nearly 800,000. Again, in contrast, over the entirety of the war, Ukraine has lost about 43,000 soldiers and about 400,000 injuries. So, by most accounts, right, I think 50 to I'd say if I had to estimate, I'd put it about 50 to 80,000 KIA this year alone. Again, with Ukraine, their total losses do not yet equal just the Russian losses from this year. But Ukraine has also been up to more than just that. Ukraine has made some really tectonic leaps forward in their drone capabilities, really equaling in technical capabilities the capacity of Russia with their Shahed drone, including hitting a target with one of their deep strike drones almost 1,000 miles from their border. And this is really a sign that, the Ukrainian ability to match the Russians drone for drone has really been the story of 2024. Leading into this year, you saw very little Ukrainian drone activity. The Ukrainians were begging authorization to launch things like ATACMS and other Storm Shadow missiles, other deep strike weapons. And when the U.S. expressed reluctance to give them that authorization, the Ukrainians said, fuck it, we'll do it ourselves. And they did. Right? Hitting hundreds of targets, actually, but particularly Russian oil infrastructure. And oil infrastructure is a natural target because one of the things that the Ukrainian deep strike capability lacks is the longer their range is, the smaller the payload. So what you want to target is something that's where the payload is already in the target, so to speak. And so an oil refinery or oil plant is perfect for that because the oil itself will form the majority of the explosive or destructive capacity. And all a drone becomes is just a little flying detonator. So that sort of policy has again, really, I think, delivered some level of result here. But before we talk about kind of the other side, which is what Russia has gained from these tremendous losses, I wanted to mention that if you want to help the Russians and North Koreans ring in the new year with a bang, you can help by providing some drones to Ukrainian units, particularly those units that helped me when I was in Ukraine. These guys, in some cases, risked their lives to get me to their headquarters and their positions so that we could conduct these interviews and deliver their drones. So if you want to help them out, the link is in the description, donorbox.org/CVR-friends. Best of all, by the way, guys, I want to mention that if you're a wine collector, we actually have one of 2 surviving bottles of sparkling champagne from the Bakhmut Champagne Factory that were saved by the 93rd. So if you want to access that, again, a literally like one or two of a kind bottle, that's going to be whoever is the first to do a big $5,000 donation. But don't worry, every little bit helps, including as little as just like $30. All of it makes a difference for these guys. Trust me. Okay, let's talk about what's happened. So in 2023, ringing in the new year, you can see that there was Avdiivka had yet to fall. And you had places like Kursk was firmly Russian. And then we could see here at the start of the new year, let's see if we can get this thing sort of lined up here, more or less. So let's bring this down some. There we go. You can just about, there we go, almost perfect. So you can see the biggest real change here has simply been here in this lower quadrant. Everywhere else, Russia's really struggled. And the fact is that this is when you see the level of the fact that really Russia's only made gains here in Donetsk and to a lesser extent here in Kupiansk, trying to get to the Oskil. And when you zoom it out over the course of, this isn't even the entire front, I want to point out. This is just kind of the eastern front, right? That you could see that Russia has paid a tremendous, tremendous price for just, I mean, in the aggregate, such marginal gain. You know, Russia had big goals for the year. They talked about taking Pokrovsk, which has not happened. They talked about taking Kramatorsk, not happened. Even Toretsk, they've been just stuck in Toretsk for literally months now. And so this sort of thing, what they thought was going to be a breakthrough or a major collapse, you know, when you zoom out and put it in context, you're like, okay, this has been Russia's most successful year for seizing territory, but that's a really low bar. Again, it's like saying, you know, it's like CM Punk. Remember him? And he had 2 fights in the UFC. One of those fights was his most successful fight ever. Now, both of them he lost in pretty embarrassing fashion, but, you know, technically, there is a best CM Punk fight, right? So that's something to keep in mind. And what has Russia paid? Well, they've not only paid in their workforce, but they've also paid in their economy. You could see over the last 12 months, they rung in the new year with a relatively stable, high-valued ruble against the dollar. And in fact, by July or June, it looked like the ruble was trading quite aggressively against the dollar. It looked like a strong, stable currency. And then in August, the U.S. took some of the gloves off in terms of sanctions. It began to really sanction Russia. And part of the reason is because this is around the time that you really started to see the inflation data say, listen, U.S. dollar, it is not, inflation is firmly under control. And so the U.S. said, okay, let's put the screws to these Russians. And you can see that it's really had an effect. The ruble has, the Russians have had a steady decrease in the ruble. And you can see a huge collapse happening in November. And now it seems like another end of year collapse is happening in the face of everything. So a 20% devaluation in the ruble relative to the dollar, and that's tracked with about other currencies as well. So the Russian economy is not something that anyone wants to really be a part of. Anyway, guys, that's really all I had. Be sure to, of course, hit that subscribe button. You know that next year we're going to still be at it. Nothing's going to change. We're going to still be covering this conflict, right? As long as the Ukrainians are fighting, I'll be here making videos every single day, 7 days a week. Thanks to Bill Collier, Robert Colburn, Gars Marnie, Gina Cresta, Chris Gorsuch, Francis Karis, AL90, Petra Taru, all of our Lieutenant tier members. I could not do this without you guys. I appreciate you so much, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers.